God of the Southern Sea and of these islands, of Māori and Pākehā, of all who dwell in our land. We give you thanks and praise for our country. We pray particularly for our Prime Minister, for Jacinda Ardern. We pray for the ministers of the Crown, those who are offering leadership at this time. We pray for our Parliament, giving thanks for this free and engaged democracy in which we live. We give thanks and praise for what we've achieved as a country over these past few weeks and what we have achieved together throughout our history. Increase our trust in one another. Strengthen our quest for justice. And bring us to unity and a common purpose. You have made us of one blood. Make us also of one mind. Amen. Now for our meeting together. God, our Creator, when you speak, there is light and life. When you act, there is justice and love. Grant that your love may be present in our meeting, so that what we say and what we do may be filled with your Holy Spirit. Amen. Just before we go back to the PowerPoint presentation, thank you so much for joining this meeting. We can see that there's a significant number of people who have linked on. We hope that not only will this be useful, but it's allowing us just to test a way of communicating that we may well want to use in the future. So we'd be really grateful for any direct feedback by email after this meeting about things that you found helpful, things that weren't helpful, so that we can learn from that and adjust our processes. I've been really encouraged by the conversations that I've been having right around the diocese. Been really enjoying joining in with the archdeaconry meetings over the last week and getting a sense of what's happening in different parts of the diocese. And I'm really grateful for the way in which people in very creative ways are reaching out to their neighbours, finding ways of praying together, of offering worship to God together, and of continuing to form the core of who we are as a diocese, which is our local and our extended diocesan family. So well done, everyone. I hope that this far into level 4 and realising that the transition to level 3 is not significantly different, but just different enough. I hope that you're managing to keep well and to remember how important it is that we act together as a community and as a nation. So let me go back to sharing my screen and the PowerPoint presentation, and you should now be seeing just the PowerPoint coming on now. Thank you, Stephen. Stephen's giving me the thumbs up, which means that hopefully everyone else can see it as well. So let me talk firstly through some of the matters related to COVID alert levels, moving particularly from 3 to 2. Just to provide a little bit of background around alert level 3. So on the government website, alert level 3 is a high level of restriction. There is still high risk that the disease is not contained, and although we're seeing really optimistic indicators, many of you will be aware of the recent case in Taranaki where someone who had actually been back in the country for nearly 4 weeks was tested positive, having originally been tested negative. And so that's just raising a bit of a concern about what isn't yet detected. And so that underscores the wisdom of us remaining at level 3. But there is a high level of optimism that level 3 may be for one incubation cycle, which is being regarded as 14 days. So community transmission is likely, new clusters may emerge, but can be controlled. Now, I'm not going to talk through all of these measures, but just to indicate that we're still managing or required to manage a whole lot of different elements, and there is still a high level of restriction. Of course, the one that is most perhaps prevalent is that gatherings are permitted, but only for up to 10 people, and that they're only explicitly for wedding services, funerals and tangihanga. So the restriction on remaining at the slightly extended bubbles and the non-gatherings is still the essential basis for level 3, as you're aware. And so we developed some guidelines reflecting the still very restricted context. And we made the decision, some dioceses have taken a slightly different view, we made the decision that churches should remain closed, and there were 2 reasons for that. The first was because we're aware that as we work down through the levels, those that are identified as vulnerable are at higher risk. And our brothers and sisters in Tikana Māori identified ethnically as being at much higher risk than non-Māori. Pacifica are also identified ethnically as being at high risk. Tikana Māori have decided to keep all churches and marae closed, even for tangihanga of less than 10 people. And so we decided that we would act alongside them in this diocese, where our relationships with Manawa Te Whiki and Upoko Te Ika are so strong. Secondly, we have to, if we open the churches, we have to, both before and after a gathering of 10 people, clean and sanitise the church to the level of a workplace. And our view was that at this point in level 3 would be both expensive and difficult to achieve for many parishes. So as we move to level 2, the emphasis here is on reduce. In other words, the disease is contained, but the risk of community transmission remains. So it's a level at which we seek to reduce all risk that we can, while starting to move both to social and economic interaction at more normal levels. There is still a possibility of household transmission, and it's likely that there will be single or even isolated cluster outbreaks. So you can see as we move to level 2, the kinds of things as we develop church guidelines that we'll need to take an account of are listed here. And again, I'm not going to go through all of these in detail because they will be up on the website, but just so you know, as the senior staff team work through what our guidelines for level 2 shall be, and obviously we're having to develop those and adjust those as the government develops their own guidelines around level 2, and they're unlikely to be settled until 48 hours out from a movement from level 3 to level 2. Therefore, we need to be keeping our guidelines flexible and in draft form up until we can lock them in as a result of government advice. But some of the principles that we'll apply are listed here. It is about keeping the most vulnerable safe. And the most vulnerable can sometimes be those that you are not even noticing. We're starting to see that it's having a particular kind of impact on a child, for example, that actually becomes ill with COVID-19. The disease takes a course which is a little different from the track in adults. And we're only learning about that across our medical services as we progress. Maintaining pastoral care, obviously gatherings of up to 100 people indoors are possible, 500 outdoors. Social distancing and contact tracing have to be possible before before buildings could be utilised. So we have to have absolute confidence that social distancing can be achieved in that particular building and that contact tracing to the standards required can be achieved as well. We've got a responsibility under law to maintain safety in church buildings, and that means the application of all workplace health and safety requirements, including those that are directly related to the sanitising of workspaces. And all of that material will be made available. What is clear is that at level 2, a significant amount of discretion will have to rest with local communities. And so you're going to have absolute confidence in your local community that you can meet the basic requirements. Has that just gone to a different screen? Or are you still seeing the PowerPoint? For some reason, my PowerPoint has disappeared. I just wanted to give you a sense of what one of our colleagues, one of our sister dioceses have started to develop, the kind of broad matrix of a range of issues that they're addressing. And again, don't focus in on the detail here. It's simply to give an example of the kinds of things that, in draft form anyway, may or may not be possible. Obviously, gatherings of more than 100 people and more than 500 people outdoors are still not possible. Communion in one kind is possible, in other words, just the bread, but it's unlikely that there will be any expectation that we can move to Holy Communion in both kinds. The sharing of the peace in a traditional handshake way will not be something that will be permissible, and so it goes on. So we're now coming to the end of that section, and so if you've got specific questions, if you like to raise your hand using the technique that Kristen outlined, so you go to the participants, manage participants list at the bottom and choose the option. Kristen will be watching and she'll introduce you and unmute you so that you can ask your question about level 3 or level 2.
Surely, Scott, you can ask your question.
Okay, it's really Taz, Scott. I'm just borrowing my wife's iPad. It's about sanitisation, because I've had a look at the government guidelines for workplaces, and I think you mentioned, Philip, that they're pretty drastic. You know, they're very extremely comprehensive and detailed, and I wonder how we brought it down to something a bit more practical.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and that's part of the work that we're doing at the moment. We anticipate that we are going to have a minimum of 14 days at level 3. As I said, there is some optimism that may be a point where we can move to level 2 rather than going for a second cycle of 28 days. But we're going to use that 14-day period to look at that kind of question. It's likely that the workplace requirements are actually going to have things added to them rather than subtracted. So we need to get specific advice, and we're trying to do that nationally rather than on a diocese by diocese basis, but to see if we can get specific recommendations for public spaces, which will include churches. So I can't give you more detail than that, simply to say we're recognising that as an important question, and we're seeking national guidelines for that.
Thanks. It's okay. That's good. So we don't want to race ahead, trying to dream up our own plan. We should just wait a wee while and see how this develops.
There are two things that you can address immediately, be thinking about, is what would social distancing look like in your church, and what will that mean for your community? So you may feel that you can work with two things in parallel. perhaps a live service or a face-to-face service that's also live streamed, to ensure that those people who aren't able to come, maybe because they're individually susceptible to infection or because they're in a vulnerable group. It may be that look at several services across a day, but then again remembering that there has to be a complete wipe down to whatever standard is finally agreed in between services. But looking at the question of what you can actually achieve in your church building, and secondly, how you'll manage your register for contact tracing. So obviously one of the simple pieces of advice that we will be giving is that one person should write up the contact register, rather than having a register sitting at the back of the church that people individually fill in, because then you've got multiple people touching paper, and we know that this particular virus lives for up to 3 days on paper and cardboard. Thanks, Taz.
Okay, cheers. Yeah.
Are there questions for the moment? Oh, Elaine.
Pastoral care for those who are not in hazardous. Our deacon, who's our only pastoral person, is actually over 79. So we've got a bit of a problem if we're going to have pastoral care like that. And half of the folk who would want pastoral care do not have computers.
Sure. So again, I think in each local context, you're going to need to work through what pastoral care options might be viable. I was interested to hear from Jan Tarrant talking about walking the dog in Putaruru and taking different routes and having gateway to front door conversations with people as she walked around. And that meets all of the requirements around social distancing, and it can be a fantastic way of communicating in person, maybe dividing up a village or a town or a parish area, and people having responsibility or taking on that responsibility of walking and talking with people. Also, telephones have been really useful to us for generations, and are still a very, very good means of maintaining contact. I know many of you have established really good phone trees and are keeping in contact regularly in that sort of simple way as well. But yes, you've got to look after those who are vulnerable, and sometimes they are our ministers. Thanks, Elaine. Jane. Not quite unmuted yet, I think.
Oh.
Yep, we are now, Jane.
Hi there, everybody. Just a quick question, and this may be coming up. In level 3, I would understand that, for instance, if you had an office person, they can go back to work as long as you keep that social distancing. And the other thing for us is that we run a market, as you know, and should we go through the diocese for advice about when we can restart, or is it better to ring Healthline and go through other avenues just to make sure that we're doing the right things?
Sure, thanks, Jane. Both those questions Simon will pick up on a little bit later in the presentation, and if he doesn't answer it satisfactorily, because I've found that about Simon, and sometimes they're most unsatisfactory answers, then you ask the question again at the end.
Okay.
Cool. Well, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, because Simon, you're going to share yours, is that right? Or am I? Yep. So I'm going to stop sharing mine so that he can share his. It'll be the same presentation though.
Working for everyone?
Yep, I think we're seeing it not in presentation mode though.
No, I'll just put that up there. Let's have a look. How's that?
Lovely.
Okay, so what I'll do, I've got a few slides to cover, but like Archbishop Philip, I'll work through all of them, and then I'll stop and invite any questions to cover those. Some of the information, hopefully you've already seen, and I'm going back through it, so hopefully it's familiar, but it is just important to make sure everybody sees it. In terms of the wage subsidy, before I work through the slides in detail, just to add context, we were in somewhat of a quandary because we're aware that we made our wage subsidy application before we had hard data that really proved or showed that we really needed it. However, all our due diligence said we were likely to need it across most, if not all, of our parishes, with op shops being shut, giving potentially down, with services not able to happen. And we felt it was actually better to give parishes stability and confidence as early as possible. So we made our application, and we've been clear in our communication that we did that because we wanted you to feel safer and more comfortable as soon as possible. But there are some consequences to that that I'll work through. This first slide here is simply just to clarify the process that you will experience in terms of receiving the subsidy. It will be paid around about the day after also of payroll going out, but up to the 21st of each month, and it will be a separate payment. So because this subsidy covers April, May and June, you'll receive 3 payments, 1 per month, and that will cover the subsidy related to the roles within your parish that were included in that subsidy application. So I just wanted parishes to understand that you'll see payroll run as normal with the reimbursement, but then you'll get a separate wage subsidy payment coming back into your accounts. Trust Management, who run most of our accounts through parish accounting, felt that this was the best way of ensuring we had an audit trail in case anyone queried anything for us. And there are 2 scenarios that we communicated that you need to be aware of around how that subsidy is managed. So for some parishes, the wage subsidy, and remembering there's a full-time and a part-time subsidy rate, is sufficient to cover the stipends or the salaries, wages of the staff, lay staff. So then parishes are reimbursed for those actual stipends and wages. It's not possible, for instance, for someone who's working very few hours and whose actual pay is less than the part-time subsidy to receive that full subsidy amount. They only get what they need to cover those hours they actually work. The second scenario was that actually, well, we've actually got a full-time clergy person, a full-time administrator, and actually the full-time wage subsidies don't cover all of that. That, in that case, becomes a part subsidy for you because you'll get the full subsidy from the government, but we're aware it doesn't cover everything. So those are the 2 scenarios that Trust Management are managing. And so the actual amounts going into parish bank accounts may vary. And if there are any discrepancies with that, or if anything doesn't make sense, I'm available, outside of this meeting, if you flick me an email, to follow those up for you. There were a few roles that weren't included in our application. We've made separate arrangements for those, and there were a few roles that weren't within diocesan payroll, but we decided that because parishes form part of our organisation from a work and income point of view, we could include them. And again, we contacted parishes about that, and there are separate arrangements in place. If someone has a role that's not in diocesan payroll and they're confused about how the wage subsidy is working, again, please feel free to flick me an email, and I will follow up with that and clarify it with you separately. 2 key questions that we're aware of. You as a parish may feel that you don't need the wage subsidy. This was one of the consequences of our decision to go early for the subsidy application. There is a real possibility that some parishes will say, well, actually, hold on, our numbers are now showing we don't need it. If that's the case, please contact me, because we have a provision where we will hold the subsidy for a parish that doesn't need it, and we will then return it to work and income. A few parishes have done this with us, and that's again part of us being transparent and making sure that we're not taking or using a subsidy when it wasn't needed. Equally, the reverse of that, we are hearing that for some parishes, as with many businesses around the country, because the wage subsidy is often only part subsidy towards the costs incurred, some parishes may now still be struggling financially, even after receipt of the subsidy. If that is the case, we would encourage you to contact me, outlining what your financial situation is looking like and the likely level of income that you're going to be needing to continue to make the payments required. Each of those cases will be assessed through the Finance and Audit Subcommittee on a case-by-case basis to see what we can provide or what advice or further action we need to take. So just wanted to make that point. We are aware that this can still be a tough time, so please contact through me if there are those issues developing for your parish. Okay, moving on to the second area of my presentation around technology. We are aware that particularly during the lockdown period, it was a requirement if people were going to continue to work that they do so from home. Now, some organisations have been well prepared for that. Others have been taken by surprise. Others have found that what they thought was okay actually wasn't, and that the technology hasn't stood the test. So this slide's really a reminder that at the moment, it is up to parishes to be responsible for ensuring that their clergy and lay staff have the equipment and the resources they need to undertake their roles, which, if that's now a requirement to work from home, does include that. So are people finding that there are reliable computers, adequate internet provision, and adequate phones for people to do their jobs properly? And ideally, best practice would say people shouldn't be using personal equipment for work practices unless actually there's an agreement in place that details how that works. So who pays for what, or who reimburses what? If something breaks, whose is it? If it's my computer but it broke while I was doing work business, where does that repair responsibility lie? This is actually, again, a very new area, and potentially one that will quickly move away from if we can return to a level 2 and we find that in actual fact under level 2 people can go about their business within offices far more freely. But it is something that I think parishes may be experiencing. We have had some people talking about the fact that actually I'm supposed to work from home, but my technology just doesn't work properly. So we do need to start to navigate that. As a diocese, we don't have the resourcing to furnish every parish to be able to remotely set up their clergy and their lay staff. But if there are significant issues, again, we would encourage you to raise those so we can begin to discuss them. Another issue that's something that a number of parishes have raised is AGMs. You will have seen earlier communication that under our statute, it was possible to delay under exceptional circumstances, which COVID-19 is, to the 31st of May. However, it's looking less likely that we'll be able to hold physical AGMs by the 31st of May. I just wanted to clarify for people that I'm awaiting some further advice from the Diocesan Chancellor to help us find a way forward. And we're looking at 2 questions. Is it possible for parishes, if that worked for them, to hold an AGM virtually, so using a Zoom-based technology? Does that meet the requirements? And if not, what can we do in terms of enabling a new decision and a new extended date? But we will come back to parishes as soon as I've got further advice from the Chancellor on that. Now, before we open up the wider questions, I thought I'd just respond to Jane's questions specifically. Around the St. Stephen's Market, Jane, we are aware that that's a big outdoor gathering. So going back to where Archbishop Philip made the point about individual parishes looking at the guidelines and being honest about their own capacity, if that outdoor activity could operate under level 2 within the maximum numbers, then the parish has to say to itself, can we maintain social distancing at this event? And can we have a system in place that allows us to meet the contact tracing requirements of the people attending. If the parish can answer confidently around that and it meets the numbers guidelines, then I think it can move ahead, but only in that instance. And if the parish doesn't think it can, then it might be something that still needs to be postponed or cancelled. In terms of your question about level 3 office access, we are erring very much on the side of the cautious approach and recognising that all those who can work from home are being required to do so at level 3. So unless there's an essential reason for going into a parish office, we are advising that people shouldn't be doing so. If people are going to do so, then all of those cleaning and hygiene standards that are floating around come into play because it is a workplace. And so anyone whose staff are going into a parish office at the moment would need to be sure that they are able to meet those requirements. Okay, I'm happy to take other questions. Or
Thanks, Simon. And just as Kristen starts to recognise the hands, just been texted a couple of people. Could we have the instructions about how to raise the hand again, please, Kristen?
Yes, you may have a white bar with everyone's name down the right side of your screen. If not, at the bottom, you should see a participants button. You can click on that and that should bring up that bar. If you hover your mouse or perhaps on an iPad, maybe your finger over your name, you can choose to raise your hand and that will bring your name up to the top and then we can unmute you so you can ask your question. Okay, Rosie.
Rosie from St Margaret's in Te Kaupata. I was just interested in the statements about needing technology to be provided for doing work at home, and just wondered about the alternative ways of connecting with people with using Zoom and other technology, whether that's those extra sorts of things are covered, like if we're needing to live stream services and things like that. So I don't know what the expectations would be around what could be provided.
just clarifying your question, Rosie, is your question around what can be provided to parishes in terms of the technology or in terms of resourcing to fund technology, or both?
Well, I'm just wondering, so maybe you need a laptop in order to work at home, but then there's these extra things coming on about how do we connect with people using video technology, and perhaps especially around suggestions to live stream services. I'm just wondering what help, either information wise or resourcing wise, there is for that, because that kind of thing's not always naturally part of what one can do.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's a good question, Rosie. We do have a lot of information available in terms of supporting access and use of Zoom as a platform through the bishop's staff team, which includes the archdeacons. We also have quite a regular dialogue about what is available online and virtually and how to access it. I mean, as a point of instant connection, working through your archdeacon or coming through me, if you're seeking information, would certainly be something I'd encourage. Where there are real technology deficits in a parish, I think, you know, the parish needs to be looking at that. But that point I raised on my email, you know, if there's something that needs sorting out to allow this to happen, you know, do please raise it so that we can begin to look at how we can help.
Mm-hmm.
If I could just add one comment too, Rosie, I think one of the things we've tried to be really clear about as a diocese is that it's really impossible to imagine that every parish is going to be able to live stream, and in fact that would provide, you know, so many options on a Sunday that it's almost ridiculous. So what, and Stephen may touch on this in his presentation around the communications options and how to access things off the website. We've tried to identify a few links to offer a few things as a diocese, and also to offer some links to where live streaming is happening, and encouraging local communities to join across the diocese, or to join even wider across the province. Some have been doing linking up with some international offerings, which has been great. Other questions for Simon?
Okay. Leslie, you can answer your question.
Yes, thank you first of all for organising all this. Some of you will not know, but Waikato and Euucharist, we're cooperating parish. So I just had a question that I think I might be asked regarding to the salaries and all that. Does not really apply to my parish, does it, Philip? Because it's cooperating, and we have two itinerant priests that come to us. So I guess I'm asking, I sort of feel like I'm in a bit of in limbo, you know, like a lot of this would not apply, would it?
No, Leslie, that's right. And not simply because you're a cooperating parish.
But because
certainly we can and have made applications. If the person who is ministering in a cooperating parish is on our diocesan payroll, then we have applied for wage subsidy as a matter of course.
Oh, okay.
The situation you're describing, however, is more to do with the fact that you don't have stipendiary clergy or an employed parish secretary or anyone occupying those kind of positions that would be on the payroll.
Yeah.
The services that you receive are essentially, as you say, itinerant and on a service-by-service basis. So there is no wage subsidy for that situation, as I understand it.
No. I thought that would be the case. I organised with the council that we would just continue to pay those people throughout this anyway, regardless, because they're doing a lot online for us. You know, like they have created lots of resources. So that's just something I needed to clarify as to where we sit in some of these issues and things. So I think, and regarding the AGM, ours we've already postponed, of course, because it happened on the day of the lockdown. And I'm aware that a large proportion of our council would not have the facilities to Zoom. But on the other hand, if it's level 3, if we're still in level 3, would it be legal to have, say for example, the parish hall set up with Zoom and people at a 2-metre distance?
No, at level 3, the only gatherings of more than 10, up to 10 people, you can only gather up to 10 people for a wedding or a funeral.
Right. So okay, so that's
level 3. There is no option for those kinds of face-to-face meetings, even with social distancing.
Yeah, I understand that. So what I probably should have thought. So if by the 31st of May we're still in level 3, we'll wait to hear from you when we can have the AGMs.
Yeah, we'll give some advice well in advance of the 31st of May, and it may be that we need some provisions which our standing committee will need to resolve around in order to set aside the requirements. And there may be some mechanisms by which, for example, annual accounts, in order to be provided to the Charities Commission, can be dealt with in another way. There's those sorts of questions that we'll be looking at. Okay. Is that the answer you would have given, Simon?
Yeah, it is, absolutely.
Oh,
yeah, and I mean, just to clarify that for those cooperating parishes who we do pay within our payroll, we did make those applications and include them, and we have encouraged cooperating parishes to talk to the denomination who is their convening partner at the moment, as well to seek any further guidance from those convening partners about what those denominations are doing.
Right, thank you. Thank you very much. Do I hand? Thank you.
Sandy? Neil?
Sandy, we're on. Sandy? Are you there?
Yep.
Yeah. Sandy's just taking a phone call about somebody just going into hospital just right now. So I have a question though. Our rates. I wrote this to Simon late in March about rates. Can we get a rate rebate or an extension on rates, because they're a big part of what we're paying out at the moment?
You're talking about rates from, as in the council rates?
Council, yeah.
It would need to be directed back to the relevant council in terms of any rate relief and rate rebate. I don't actually have any particular details to hand around how those processes are working. I'm not sure if you've come across anything, Philip.
Yeah, I think there's there is an effort nationally to direct that request to, I can't think of the name of the actual association, but it's like the Local Governments Association, so that they can look at it collectively as well as look at it on a council by council basis. But at the moment, generally, local councils are not granting rate relief. If this whole process extends significantly longer than the 7 weeks of 5 weeks at level 3 and 2 weeks at level 5 weeks at level 4 and 2 weeks at level 3, then it's likely that the local government will look at that. That's the only information I have, but it's at that general level at the moment, Colin.
Thank you for that. I have talked to the council about it, and it's whether we do something as a diocese or whether we do it individually, because diocese has a lot more influence and clout than what individuals do.
Yeah, well, as I said, we're initially attempting something nationally, so making a national approach to the local government association or whatever it's actually called, and the advice may well then come back that on a diocesan basis we should write a common letter to all of the district authorities, local authorities. So we're looking at that, but we've been told anything under the 7 weeks is not likely to draw a sympathetic response, but that if it goes for longer than 7 weeks, then we should try again, basically.
Thank you. That answers my question. Sandy has a question.
First, I need my apologies. I'm not showing myself. I've spent 2 hours in the gully, our conservation area, and it's not nice. So,
well, it's good not to see you, Sandy.
That's great. I'm glad you appreciate my efforts on your behalf. First, I need to give Sue McLean's apologies. Her husband's just been taken by ambulance to hospital.
Oh my goodness.
And she just wanted to say that she's thinking of us all, but her focus is elsewhere at the moment, and we're just offering our support and keeping in touch. I have a question regarding, we've been talking about virtual AGMs and the possibilities around that. And I have to be honest, I've been reflecting theologically, which I'm sure you'll be very pleased about, regarding Eucharist and sacraments. And I sort of understand I think I understand some of the reasons for the decision not to have virtual sacrament, etc. But I have been reflecting on what I understand I was taught, which is that the person presiding does so on behalf of the congregation, cannot preside unless there is a congregation. And I just wonder if we're able to do a bit more reflection on the possibility. As a couple who are living in a retirement village, we went into lockdown before the rest of the nation, and from what I'm hearing, we're going to be in lockdown for a lot longer. And a good part of our congregation will be in the same position. So we're going to be going longer and longer without being able to share communion. And I'm just wondering, I mean, I can remember stories of soldiers in the Vietnamese War, you know, sharing cold rice and water and making it communion on Christmas Day. You know, I mean, I can remember many stories from different parts of the world in horrendous moments where they managed to find a way to share communion. And I just wonder if that's something, if we're looking at AGMs, is there some way to look at that again and maybe consider some other possibilities? I'm not trying to make a decision on behalf of anybody else. I'm just aware that there are a lot of us for whom communion at least once a week is actually a vital part of our spiritual well-being, our soul food. And I'm just wondering how long we can keep going without that. It's becoming a bit of a problem for some of us.
Yeah, it's certainly something which is a really important part of my my spirituality and my personal discipline and my experience of God. The position that the bishops have taken, and which I strongly support, is that now is not the time to make really quite long-term theological changes. That actually it's raised a really significant concern, a really significant challenge, and we need to think that through very carefully, and we need to look at our theology of the Eucharist really carefully. But that's not something that we should do under pressure. That said, I'm aware of all sorts of things that people are doing to address that need, and I think that people are responding to the need that they have. I think there's a difference between authorizing something without having addressed the theological realities properly and carefully, and people addressing their particular spiritual need in a way that's informed and careful.
That's very helpful, thank you. So I know that there have been times, say, for instance, on a Maundy Thursday where we've had, and don't worry, that alarm is not anything to do with us, we're not on fire. It's one of the enjoyments of living on a retirement village. I know we've had things like agape meals and things like that.
Sure. So
am I hearing that we can be a little creative in how we gather virtually without it becoming, yes, I don't want to be disrobed.
Look, I'm not intending to exercise any disciplinary function in relation to people addressing their spiritual needs in good conscience and in the best way that they see possible, even if that is a breach of current teaching and practice of the church. I don't think that's a helpful way of responding at all. I'm simply asking, along with my colleague bishops, that we don't authorize as bishops something which is currently not provided for or agreed to. We have a really clear process that we follow in our church that's served us really well. It can sometimes be ponderously slow and unresponsive at one level, but we are a people whose theology is defined by our prayer book and is defined by our formularies. We're not a confessional church. We don't have a magisterium like Rome. We are what we pray is who we are.
Yes.
And so to make a change on the hoof around our prayer book and our formularies related to the Eucharist would be a fundamental breach of what defines us. So we're not going to move to authorize something without good process. If we find ourselves in a very extended process, the bishops will obviously talk about it. They're talking about it. We're meeting weekly and we talk about these things every time we meet, because we're acutely aware of the pastoral consequence and the spiritual consequence of some of these choices that we're making at this stage of things.
Thank you very much, Archbishop Philip. Appreciate your feedback.
My pleasure. I'm going to carry on with the presentation now, because there'll be some who will want to leave when the presentation is complete, and that's fine, and we can stay and answer more questions. We still will pause as we go through, but we'll just take a couple of questions at each point. I'm now going to reshare my now I've lost the option to share my I've completely lost all the things at the bottom of my screen. I've got it back again. Now you should see a screen which says clergy as essential workers. Stephen, can you see that? Excellent, thank you. I'm going to just work through a couple of slides which look at the interaction that we've been having with government on a regular basis. I've represented the heads of churches group in ministerial meetings. So that's the Roman Catholic, Presbyterian, Methodist, Anglican, obviously, Baptist, and Salvation Army, along with colleagues who are working directly with our city missions, the Salvation Army head of social services, the director of the New Zealand Council of Christian Social Services. So I've had a unique opportunity to engage with government, and I've had a unique opportunity to raise issues right from the very beginning of level 4 lockdown. And I know that there's been significant frustration amongst clergy that we are not and have not been regarded as essential workers. And that's been something that the government have considered and reconsidered several times, but we have not made progress there. But I wanted just to talk through some of the things that we have been able to discuss. We've been concerned about the long-term psychological impact of lockdown, of people not being able to support those who are dying, those who are not able to grieve in ways that respect their beliefs. And so we've kept that to the fore. So even if we're having a discussion about access to benefits, we've begun each meeting by reminding ministers of the long-term pastoral responsibilities that we have and that we are suggesting they have as government. So we've looked specifically at the impact on families of not being present with family members who die of COVID-19. We were dealing with a presenting issue in one of those conversations about if a child was dying of COVID-19, and there was, at the point we were having this discussion, a child who had been diagnosed with COVID-19, if they ended up in intensive care and they were in extremis, they could not have a parent present. They could not have a parent present with them in intensive care. And the impact of that on the parents and on the child and on siblings was something that we talked through at length with government and government officials. And you'll see that there has been a relaxing around the presence of family members or a family member for someone who's in intensive care who doesn't have COVID-19, and that in part has been a direct consequence of not just us but others as well raising those concerns and trying to work with government and government officials around what might be practical ways of managing the risk and getting that family support in alongside people. Hospital chaplains were initially not on the list of non-clinical essential workers for our health service, and they were added, I think, about 3 weeks into level 4. We've talked with government a lot around the spiritual care of people at the time of death and for the bereaved, and you'll see that there was a relaxation or an introduction of this protocol around up to 10 and celebrants of both funerals and weddings being allowed to re-engage. So that has been a shift from level 4 to level 3, and it wasn't likely to actually be in the provisions until level 2. It's now possible that such support, if we had to return back to level 4 because of a spike or reinfection, that some of those provisions might be carried back up into level 4. So these conversations have been dynamic and really helpful. And we've asked that we be consulted, and we've included our interfaith colleagues in this conversation around any development of intentional responses to the long-term trauma of bereavement without being able to respond personally. Other issues that we've advocated around have been around access to benefits, provision so beneficiaries don't have to meet compliance requirements during this period of lockdown because they're impossible to meet. And if you don't meet your compliance requirements, you can lose your benefit, and that was just happening automatically, unfortunately. Issues around housing provision, working with government around that, and access to essential services, particularly in rural communities where access to services during lockdown was becoming a matter of concern in some of our rural communities. And obviously the fundamental thing about food access and distribution, again, in some smaller rural communities, that was very, very hard to achieve. And people in small communities were taking personal risk in order to ensure that neighbours had food. And so we were working with government and with the food distribution process to try and address that. So I just wanted you to know that we had been working through a range of issues with government, and that while the essentials, clergy as essential service providers, we hadn't got movement on, there were a number of areas where we had. Perhaps I'll just see if there are any particular questions. It might be that I take note of the questions and answer them later, but any particular questions around that before we move on? Okay, just as we noted before, in terms of worship options, we made a decision to do what we can do and do that well. We're not a diocese with large resources. And so we've looked to a number of parishes, both our cathedrals by way of example, offering live stream options. There are other parishes who are doing really inventive and creative stuff about things that are available through email or through letterbox drops. But as a diocese, we've offered a midweek reflection that I've really enjoyed thinking about and putting together and making available. And I mean, Stephen has made them look really good. I just send him a raw recording, and he puts all these fancy things at the start of it. And if you think in any way that is me, think again. That's all Stephen. But you can access all of this on the website, and Stephen's going to talk a bit more about this in a moment. There's the 7 o'clock evening night prayer on a Sunday evening. There's the daily devotions Monday to Friday at 9 o'clock. And there's just a huge amount of resource that's available through the website. I mean, one good news story, the Pioapatanga Aotearoa have a Sunday service in the morning, and they're getting regularly between 12 and 12,500 people joining that service, which is pretty extraordinary, and a very significant proportion are in the 30 to 40 year age group. And Archbishop Don assures me that that's not their normal Sunday clientele. So it's a really significant development, and they're thinking very hard about how to continue to relate to that group once we move through this pandemic period. We're going to move to communications and Stephen in a moment, but just again, any quick questions? Cool. Well, I'm going to stop sharing, and Stephen's going to share his now. Oh, very cool, Stephen.
Now, can you hear me?
There you go.
Look, I've just done the most stunning introduction. I'm really sorry you missed it. In the interest of time, we'll just have to push on. Actually, look, I'm delighted to see so many people here and really grateful for this opportunity to look at what we've tried to achieve with our communications platforms over the last few weeks. I'm going to go quite quickly through these slides, but don't be alarmed because the raw material is already online for you to download it and read as a PDF and share with people so that they can access this material and get used to finding out where all our information is as well. So all that we're trying to do through our communications platform is through the lens of our Episcopal vision, and that's threefold: marked by gratitude, growing disciples, transforming communities. And that's the kind of language and thinking that we want you to be able to communicate in your ministry units and congregations as well. This specific strategy that we put together for the COVID challenge is summarised really quickly here. So the first thing we did was to establish our diocesan communications team, commit to a regular Connect newsletter, regular Episcopal videos, the Monday to Friday daily devotions online, the night prayer on a Sunday night, and then a real emphasis on resourcing and strategy. We never wanted to compete, but our desire is to support your local experts, the leaders, lay and ordained, who are working in your ministry unit so effectively already, to give them all that they need and adjust it for the context. So hopefully that's been borne out in your experience as well. For the next few slides, I'm not going to dwell on them for very long, but because it's available on the website now. What I want to do is just take you through the different platforms we have and the kind of content that's available so that you're able to use it and share it with others as well. On the left-hand side of each panel is a screenshot directly from whatever resource I'm talking about. So at the moment, you're looking at our website. I sincerely hope that all of you know that we have this new website and that you're using it regularly to stay up to date with what we're trying to do alongside you. It is huge and it's absolutely packed with resources, and if you can't immediately find what you're after, then do know on the homepage, hopefully you can see my mouse doing laps, there is a search bar there. So if you enter in what you're after, it'll open up a new text screen listing the different possible hits. So don't be afraid of using that. The homepage is designed to instantly update you with where we're at and connect you to the regular things that we're doing. So these three grey buttons here give you access to daily devotions or our family resources through Strands or prayers from Bishop Philip's house on a Sunday night. Then you've got the COVID responses and our resourcing for alternate ways of worshipping together. That's also where the Bishop's video messages are. Further down the page, you would find links to mission, education, and vocation, Anglican, our diocesan calendar, which records all of our events in real time, spiritual practices, and social media that I'll come back to in a moment. The whole funding rationale behind this, because this entire website was funded thanks to the St John's College Trust Board, was to reorient our emphasis on mission, education, and vocation. So that's why you see those as the key tabs along the top of this website. On each page, we try to give you the theology, something practical, some links, and the opportunity to go deeper. Under education, it's the same format, but there are much more structured resources. Hopefully you know by now that everything that was developed for Lift is now freely available online. So if you, your home group, your church, your wider network wanted to download all 3 books and every one of the videos then that's there for you right now. It's another way to give you some focus as you go through to the next period of lockdown. And you can just select particular topics to revisit, of course, as well. Whenever we have training days, we record the resources online, and there are a number of other training opportunities for you to explore, as well as a large section on spiritual practices. So if you want to get up on a Monday and see spirituality with the Reverend Canon Sue Pickering, that's a great place to really get your week established for the focus on God. We've got Ignatian reflection, colouring in, drawing, Lectio Divina, lots of different things to appeal to different people. So do encourage people to go through those sites. If there are other things you find useful, please just let me know. If you don't know my email already, at the bottom of every page there's submit a question, and that will come to me. On the vocation site, we've broken it down so that you understand exactly what the process is for lay and ordained, and we've got an introduction from Bishop Philip talking about his own experience of vocation and concluding with some mini bios from people from lay and ordained traditions, or callings rather. Anglicanism is an overview of who we are, right from our diocesan vision, our connection to the communion and roadmap in general, and Anglican liturgical resources. And then the second to last tab is administration. So the interactive map, which gives all of the ministry unit locations in our diocese, all our statutes and policies and forms and finance, insurance, property, and so on. All of that is secured on the admin page. When we talked about our communications priorities, what we were concerned to do was to get everyone on connected. At the moment, we have got some, but not nearly enough. So please, can you encourage everyone to go online and subscribe? You get to it very simply by clicking on the connected button in the top right corner. And when you do that, you will see this page and the opportunity to click on join our mailing list. So if anyone says, I'm not on, the diocese doesn't communicate with me, invite them to be empowered and sign themselves up, or you could sign them up on their behalf. There is a record of all 40 odd issues of Connected there if you want to go back and revisit anything, and the standing invitation that if you have a story or a resource or anything to share, please submit it so that we get some real diversity and representation in that space. Throughout the website, there are a number of links to the other communication platforms that we use. So while the website is the hub, it's orbited by YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. At present, we have our own YouTube channel that you can see represented here, and there are more than 50 videos available at the moment. They include recordings of night prayer if you're unable to be there on a Sunday night. We've just introduced Bishop Philip's weekly sermons, and his weekly reflections are there, as well as all the other educational videos that we've done over the last 18 months or so. So if you subscribe, you'll get an alert when something new goes up. If there are particular things that you would like to see, do let us know. If there's a topic that you think needs more attention and you want to hear from us, we're really happy to try and respond and put something together. If you want to know where your bishop is at, then his Instagram is a place to go. The live feed is on the bottom of our home page of the website, so you can always visit that and it just automatically updates. Or you can follow the links in this PDF and they'll take you directly through to where he has been. And I can tell you for the last 40 days, is it, Bishop? You've been at home. Might even be longer.
It is longer.
One day you'll be liberated. I think it's just one or two slides to go. Kristen, who you can see on screen, I hope, has worked really hard to recover our Facebook page and identity. So that's been up and running for 3 or 4 weeks. There's some live stream links, there's connections to all the other Facebook pages and our Anglican community, and lots of updates happen there as well. So do connect to that. Again, if you go to the home page, go to recent updates, you'll see this PDF with the link straight through and buttons scattered across the website. And golly, that's what happens if you click on that page. It takes you straight to the Facebook site itself. So bear with me for a moment while I go back to the page that I really want to be on. Thank you. So just summing that up and making a plea. Please get on to Connected and subscribe. It's our fundamental platform for telling you what's going on. Reflections, news, events, resources, prayers. We have been doing it, as many of you will know, pretty much every week throughout lockdown, but we will fall back to monthly as time goes on. Encourage others to subscribe so they don't feel like they're missing out. Put a note in your pew sheet, maybe print the first couple of pages out and put it on your notice board at church when you're allowed back in your churches. Do dig into the website, Facebook, YouTube and Instagram to discover the treasures that are in there. I'm eternally open to constructive feedback, so feel free to send that kind of feedback through to me. And just a final comment before I invite you to ask any questions. If you want to share any of this and the kind of guide to getting your way through the website and where stuff is, this is available right now. So do encourage people to go to the link under recent updates on the homepage. So if you have a question, Kristen will arrange you in an orderly fashion.
Mel.
Thank you. Tēnā koutou whānau. A question for communication. Can I print out my reflection and post it or hand post it to my congregation? At level 3.
Perhaps if I have a shot at that, Stephen. So nice to see you back in your own home, Mel. Got to say, our household's slightly quieter than it was 24 hours ago. Just saying. The answer is, New Zealand Post is operating, and so the government's assessment is that postal methods are within the bounds of appropriate communication. We just need to be aware of what they're doing to be careful around that. And so if you're able to achieve this level of care, then there is no issue whatsoever. So hands are a significant means of transmission. So you need to be confident that the paper that you're using it's longer than 4 days since anyone else touched it. You need to protect your hands when you touch the paper, just in case, even though you've been in lockdown for so many weeks, but thinking forward and ahead to when we've got greater levels of interaction. If your hands are not directly touching the paper, so you're wearing gloves, for example, when you put the printer in, when you put what you've printed into an envelope, and if you've got gloves on your hand when you're writing on the envelope the name of the person, and you're using gloves when you put it into the letterbox, then you've done everything you possibly can to eliminate any possibility of transition, unless you sneeze on it or breathe on it, or even worse, sing at it, because lots and lots of water droplets get communicated when you sing. So just be really conscious of what you're breathing on and what you're touching. And otherwise, it seems to me that it's well within the bounds of what's already been identified by government as acceptable practice.
Marlo.
Any other questions around communications?
Okay, well, Stephen's going to stop sharing and I'm going to share. We've got about 10 minutes before we finish, so I'm going to... Oh, Leslie.
We do have a...
The whole website thing, and I think I flicked to Stephen. I send it overseas to people I know, and they just love it. And so, well done, you guys. And I think you could almost become addicted, Philip, to to watching. So that's probably a good thing. I'm not sure, but thank you so much. Thank you.
Oh, that's terrific. Thank you.
Thanks, Leslie. And can I just add my thanks to you, Stephen? I mean, I think the work that you've done over many, many, many months, not just over the last few weeks, is just one of the great successes in the diocese. And it's been a huge amount of hard work. And I'm glad that you've got a team around you now. That's one of the benefits of COVID-19. And I'm really excited about the quality of the communication and the variety of it. So thanks very much indeed. Now I'm going to really quickly move through the last section of slides, and that should leave us with hopefully 6 or 7 minutes for some final questions. So let me just share this again, and this is really just a comment where I think we're all at a point where many of us are feeling quite flat. It's been a long haul, and we know that there's a bit to go yet, and we're just hoping like crazy that level 2 will come to pass sooner rather than later. And I've been really impressed with the way so many creative ways have been identified of making pastoral contact with people. But now is a time perhaps just to reassess that and just to ask the question, is there anyone who's falling through the gap that we can reach out to in some way? So nothing more than that. Just be conscious that being good neighbours is at the heart of the gospel, and if we can just think about whether there's anyone who's slipping through. So this last section is really to say it's going to be very important as we move forward that we learn from what this experience is teaching us. I'm finding that there's a whole lot of meetings that I'm not missing. And it seems to me the church is working pretty effectively irrespective of those meetings. And then I'm seeing all sorts of creativity coming to the surface and thinking, gosh, we just don't want that creativity to disappear. We want to create an environment where that can thrive. What we're doing, therefore, is we're looking at this at a number of levels, and we're taking learnings, recording those learnings as we go. I mentioned before that I've got a unique privilege and opportunity in terms of my role as Archbishop. We have a National Anglican Pandemic Advisory Group which is doing some terrific stuff to support particularly Tikana Māori and Pacifica, who are on their own journey across the islands of the Pacific, and it's a difficult journey that they're involved in. Our registrar managers from across all of the amarangi and the diocese are meeting on a weekly basis, and the cross-fertilisation and pollination of resources and ideas and ways of approaching things has been fantastic. Would that we don't lose that in the future. The Tikana Pākehā bishops have been meeting weekly by Zoom. We had that at 7:30 this morning for an hour. And we've built a level of collegiality and relationship and learning from each other, which we haven't seen before. Not in 20 years of being a bishop have I seen this quality of support between the bishops and the sharing of resources and information. That's a huge benefit in learning that we're taking. Our own bishop staff meet weekly, and there's a small diocesan pandemic advisory group that I meet with once a week as well to try and filter through so much of the information we're gathering and the opportunities and challenges that we're seeing. And I've already talked about the diocesan communications team, which I think are a bit of a dream team at the moment. And yep, thanks, Stephen. I'm giving you lots and lots and lots of feedback today. So those things, those ways of assessing what we're learning are happening as we work through this. But one of the things that I'm noticing is that the basic direction that we set and we worked on so hard as a bishop staff team and as a diocese over 12, 18 months about what are the characteristics that need to define us as a diocesan family, that we are a people who are marked by gratitude, that we live our lives with a sense of thanksgiving to God and wanting to give glory to God for this extraordinary life that we live, that we are called to grow ourselves as disciples of Jesus, to walk more closely in his footsteps, and that we are also called to grow disciples, to introduce Jesus to others. And there's been lots of opportunities that I've witnessed over the past few weeks where people have done just that, not necessarily by being explicit in what they've said, but by the way that they have cared and the way they have supported others. And that we are called to be communities that just by the experience of being in those communities, we are transformed into, better images of ourselves, because they are communities of love and support and justice and transformation, and that those communities are transforming the communities in which they're set. That vision, that is our vision, is a vision which is not only viable in this time of pandemic, but actually goes to the heart of it. And I think we should be encouraged by that and supportive of that moving forward. And so you remember that we identified 3 key priorities, and they, in all that I can see emerging out of this time, they remain critical to our progress moving forward. And so, as Stephen said, the whole of the way in which our resources are being presented are predicated on those 3 characteristics and these 3 priorities. That we work towards a model of collaborative leadership. It's not all about one person being the leader. It is about what we do and can achieve together. It's using the gifts of each for the good of the whole. Secondly, that we are investing increasingly in children, family, youth and young adults, growing a new generation of disciples, a new generation of followers of Jesus. And that finally, we're focusing in terms of our growing mission on the need to reinvigorate our rural mission and communities with our presence, our proclamation of Christ, our witnessing to his saving power, and that we are responding to the particular challenges of urban growth in Hamilton. Now, there are key representatives of this collaborative leadership. The first is the archdeacons, who are, for every ministry unit, the local point of contact. They are the first stop. They're the people who've got their ears to the ground, and I can tell you from my bishop staff meetings that they listen really carefully and they feed information back constantly. They're a fantastic team, and they're working really hard at building community in each of those archdeaconries. They are to be the pastor of the pastors in their archdeaconry and for the clergy families particularly. And there too for lay leadership. We're looking at the way we build at every level of the diocese a healthy culture of interdependence and mutual support. And these are very talented people. They bring key giftings which we want to deploy to their best. So a number of the archdeacons are picking up particular portfolios. And obviously the role of the archdeacon for mission education and vocations is a unique diocesan-wide role, and there are several who are close to that work, supporting that work, and that's growing. For example, Paul Weeding's appointment in conjunction with his role as the Vicar of Melville to be the Associate Director for Vocations and working through, it's fantastic, a growing number of people presenting for consideration for ordination. And then finally, our cathedral deans, who in each bishopric are my fundamental representative. I can't be in all places at all times, but the deans represent me both in leadership and in all sorts of civic occasions. The Vicar General of the diocese, currently Trevor Harrison, will be Wendy Scott from the middle of this year. I'm asking them to focus particularly on the relationship with Amarangi and iwi in each of the bishoprics. The cathedrals offer liturgical and musical leadership, marketplace and public education leadership, and civic leadership. And again, they bring particular leadership expertise. So they offer particular leadership in each of the bishoprics, and that's a way of collaborating across our senior team, which is certainly life-giving for me as your bishop, and I think life-giving for the whole diocese. So that's our presentation. I'm going to stop sharing this, and I know we've reached our 1 o'clock time, but the key presenters will just stay online and be happy to address any questions. But for those of you who need to slip away now, thank you so much for giving this time. Do give us some feedback about how you found this format of presentation. Let us know the things that we could do better. Bless you heaps for all that you're doing in your local context. The church is alive and well, and Christ is risen. He's risen indeed. Alleluia.